Hey everybody, so today's video is going to be a bit different. So I wanted to let you guys know there's going to be some issues, whether it be misreading the script, issues with editing, or other random problems. But seeing as this is my first real video essay, I believe it can only get better from here. In the meantime, let's get to the video. Crazy weather we've been having, huh? The Cold War. What can be said about the Cold War that hasn't been said a million times by internet historians already? It wasn't very cold. I mean, yeah, there was an argument to be made that was pretty heated the whole time. But even as there were wars and lots of ideological conflict, we never had nuclear conflict. And hearing it from my very American parents who grew up during the Cold War, there was a pretty substantial and deep rooted fear that nuclear conflict was almost inevitable. So, what if it was? What if the clash of two nuclear superpowers was, in fact, inevitable? And the Cold War turned hot.
Взрыв сопровождался световой вспышкой необычной силы. В этот момент самолет-носитель находился в 40 и последующие свечения, несмотря на сплошную облачность, были видны в радиусе до... Полевой столб, поднимающийся с земли, быстро увеличился в объеме.
Alright, well, here is the obligatory spoiler warning. Even though this movie came out 40 years ago, we'll have a timestamp on screen to when we're actually going over my thoughts on the movie and not just giving a synopsis. I do suggest watching it for yourself. I will have a link to the movie in the description, but yeah, on to the movie. The film opens showing a Strategic Air Command jet stationed in Omaha, Nebraska. One of the first discernible characters we're introduced to is some general, and he's getting some status updates from the crew. The plane takes off, and we get our 80s intro scene with music that I feel is way too upbeat for the course of this movie. Near the end of the intro sequence, we see a TV broadcast announcing the slowly deteriorating situation in Europe, which many aren't huge fans of having characters, or in this case, broadcasts of characters, exposition dumping, but I feel like it works in this setting.
Provocative. You call us provocative? When your Americans have 260,000 soldiers and 7,000 nuclear weapons poised on the other side of our border.
And speaking of characters, the first real characters is a group of doctors. Most of them aren't actually introduced, but the important one we should pay attention to is Dr. Russell Oakes. Our second set of characters introduced immediately after, I will say the scene switching in this movie is like almost nauseating. Like it's absurd. But our second set of characters, with again, we're focusing on one of them, is named Airman First Class Billy McCoy. Riding in a helicopter, we get a fun little bit of foreshadowing.
Hey, any of you guys hear anything about an alert?
Not this weekend, buddy. I'm going fishing.
Who goes fishing? He generally falls in love.
When you fall in love, you fall in love.
And just like that, we're on to our next group, the Dahlberg family, and technically Bruce, who is Denise's fiance, Denise being the oldest daughter of the father of the family, Jim. And there's also an annoying younger sister, but we'll get to her. And my and probably your dislike for her soon. But for now, you see Denise and Bruce late to their wedding rehearsal and running while still getting dressed to a motorcycle. Running to a motorcycle while still getting dressed. There.
should have told her to come with us.
No, they probably just wanted a little privacy.
Privacy?
You know, Dad, privacy. Oh, Jolene, that's disgusting.
They show up late after the family makes a bunch of sex jokes, and we switch back to our airman first class, just like that. It doesn't get any better. Landing at a Minuteman launch control site, and if you don't know, Minuteman is one of the U.S. ballistic missiles. We're on to the next with our original friend, Dr. Oaktree, with his oldest daughter, Marilyn, yapping to him about China's landscapes or some shit. Like, real fascinating character we get. Anyways, she's moving away because of reasons, and her dad and mom would both be against it to an extent, so she tells them separately. The dad being the first to do it and being easier. I don't know why I'm telling you guys this. This is really, like, insignificant shit. It's fine. I suffered, so you do too. Whatever. Anyways, we're heading back out to the airmen, who were also heading out. Then we get a scene switch to the Henry farm with some hick on a tractor. Then we're introduced to the rest of the family, and we see the airmen pulling up in the distance. Which is pretty similar to how our own timeline has ICBM silos peppered around the mid and northwest primarily, usually being found near on private property. The airman waves to the farm lady and the kids argue back and forth, while our Chair Force friends runs with his comrades to do the maintenance they were sent out there to do. We cut back to the farmers and get more exposition dropped through an interview on TV where someone is explaining, along with some radio exposition.
Evaluate its own nuclear commitment. Scrub it all together if the Labor Party had its way. You see, the real fear is that when the chips are down and the red light's blinking, that the United States won't really want to sacrifice Chicago for Hamburg, as the saying goes.
She only applied to Boston because he was
The doctor and his wife yap about stuff to do, and we're introduced to more exposition to the kitchen TV. The wife is understandably startled by the news.
Divisions of the East German Army. To repeat, East Germany tonight sealed off the borders to West Berlin, closing the 4 principal West German access corridors at Lauenburg, Helmstedt, Ehrlichhausen, and Rudolfstein.
I don't believe this is happening.
You want to go in the living room and watch?
I just want to go upstairs and get into bed. With you.
And wants to just be in bed, which, I mean, if I heard the world was ending, I'd probably just want to be in bed too, if I'm being real. But, I don't know. I get it. Then, voila, we're back to Bruce and Denise. We're talking about segs, and Denise goes to get some sort of contraception. Like Plan B or a condom or some shit. I don't fucking know. The little annoying sister gets it and does Tom and Jerry ass chase, just running around the house before their mom basically breaks it up, and the youngest one pisses off, the oldest one goes to get laid. Hell yeah. We see more exposition from the TV.
By halting all air traffic in and out of Tegel and Tempelhof airports. As cabinet and congressional leaders of both parties, the president tonight declared all United States military personnel on worldwide stage 2 alert.
And switch from the Dahlbergs to the doctor with his wife in bed, similarly watching TV, causing them to reminisce about the Cuban Missile Crisis, where they thought it was going to happen. It was over. They thought it was the end. Near the end of the conversation, the wife asked a chilling question that almost every reasonable person would ask during a period of tension as high as it is.
What if it does happen? What do we do?
We cut back to the Dahlbergs, and Denise is riding off with Bruce, as the dad looks so sad, I guess. And just like that, we get to see our friend Airman McCoy at home. Like, this shit switches insano style. Like, I'll have to show some of the edits. At home, talking with his girlfriend or wife, maybe. It's not really like, it doesn't, we don't know if that's Airman McCoy's wife or girlfriend, whatever. Either way, he's trying to reassure her because he got called up for an alert and has to ditch his family plans. Fuck. He has to ditch his family plans. After that, it's a few cuts going from the doctor to Dahlberg's house, and the only important things here is the newspaper said Berlin was blockaded and Denise came home in the morning and her dad's mad because she snuck out. A minor argument ensues, and after that's quickly resolved, we get another cut to a football game. This shit is insane. It literally is just all over the place. If you're, I don't even know. Whatever. Run. Let's fucking, yeah. Now, before we get into the next scene, I just want to say the multiple storylines being tied together to an extent is nice, but it can be confusing and kind of random. The cuts will go from one place to another with no real explanation. And it's just hard to read. It's kind of exhausting. It just moves the plot forward. That's really the only reason that it exists as it is. It's not really a major problem, especially watching it the first time around, but I will say there's at least been one time where I had no idea which group of people I was looking at. It's all over the place. Anyways, we get a little bit of footage of people playing football, and on watching this back, I'm mostly sure I heard somebody rip ass when they hit each other. Editor, play the clip. Anyways, after that, the doctor goes and talks to the father of a random player about their kids to one another. They exchange names with one another, and the doctor just walks away. Wow. Riveting. We see Dr. Oaktree driving and get more exposition from the radio.
French news agency has received conflicting reports of East German resistance and heavy casualties. But ground observers have confirmed that 2 Soviet-built MiG-25s invaded West German airspace, firing several air-to-ground missiles at a NATO munitions storage facility, and also hitting a school and hospital outside of...
And when Oakes arrives at the hospital, from a co-worker as well.
While we save a single blue baby, they are bombing hospitals in Würzburg.
I'm afraid to listen to the radio anymore.
Have you heard the latest? There is a rumor they are evacuating Moscow. Yeah.
We cut to a college registration center, and many are trying to simply live their lives, while others are slowly being informed about the unfolding tragedy. While others are slowly being informed about the unfolding tragedy, slowly seeping out of Berlin and Germany into the rest of Europe and the world. Some annoying girl makes a half-educated geopolitical guess. It just shows a complete lack of understanding of the severity and complexity of the situation. God damn, I was mean. Writing this script, I didn't hold back. Suggesting the U.S. wouldn't nuke Russians for invading Germany, but would rather do it if Saudi oil came under threat.
Look, did we help the Czechs, the Hungarians, the Afghans, or the Poles? Well, we're not going to nuke the Russians to save the Germans. I mean, if you were talking oil in Saudi Arabia, then I'd be real worried.
I mean, okay, maybe that was fair. For this next little bit, there's 2 main people I want to talk about. Red shirt guy and white shirt guy. Red shirt guy hitchhikes in somebody's truck to ride... Red shirt guy hitchhikes in someone's truck to go try and see his parents before shit hits the fan. The guy in the white shirt desperately needed a haircut for the end of the world and went to get one. While their conversation regarding the situation in Europe is in full swing, and the barber drops some real shit.
You want to know what crazy is? Crazy's not staying out of other people's business. We shouldn't be over there in the first place.
Then they continue to talk for a bit more about the concept of launch on warning and use 'em or lose 'em, 2 very real awful strategies for using nuclear weapons. The conversation ends with another, what I thought was, chilling quote.
Nowhere? There's no nowhere anymore. You're sitting next to the Whiteman Air Force Base right now. That's about 150 Minuteman missile silos spread halfway down the state of Missouri. That's an awful lot of bullseyes.
We cut back to Mr. Dahlberg on the freeway. We hear a faint broadcast on the radio saying,
The rumor that low kiloton range nuclear weapons were detonated this morning during the conflict, resulting in the reported destruction of Wiesbaden and the outskirts of Frankfurt.
This is the emergency broadcast system. All persons in transit in the Kansas City metropolitan area are advised to proceed immediately to the municipal shelter facility in the community or township closest to your current location. While there is no immediate danger to the Kansas City area, the Federal Emergency Management Agency urges you to learn the steps to be taken in the event of a probable attack.
The Dahlberg family is helping a church prepare for the inevitable end by stacking dirt against the lower part of the foundations, presumably to protect the basement from radiation. They do understand that it is in vain. They head home and begin to prepare for the worst, with the son of Jim going to fill up milk jugs with water. We cut to the doctor. He's in line at a payphone and realizes the hopelessness of the situation after talking to a stranger. He gets on the road to Kansas City, getting a fucking move on. The situation across the board is just getting worse. Panic is setting in, alongside with disaster consumerism, causing people to absolutely lose their fucking minds. And also, one thing I have to say about this scene in particular is how well composed the store workers are. Like, it might just be a thing with people in the 80s being built different, but I feel like almost anyone working one of those jobs would be panicking as much as the rest of the people trying to buy shit. Like minimum wage, and you're gonna sit there and scan toilet paper while the rest of the world is preparing for nuclear winter? Damn. That's dedication to the cause. Anyways, we see white shirt guy in line and he asks for a news update, and oh, isn't that great? There's naval battles in the Persian Gulf. My guy looks distraught, which, like, fair enough. I mean, could you imagine this happening today? Yes, actually I could. Right, shirt guy pushes his way out of the building, but, like, was he buying anything, or did he just go in to browse but got in too late so everything was just gone? It didn't seem like everything was just gone. But if that's the case, why was he standing in line? I mean, if he stole something, that makes sense, but I just don't think he did. Minor thing, just thought I'd point that out. I mean, this is an old movie, so I can't give it too much shit. Anyways, he just runs out onto his bike and gets moving, because in a situation like this, it's kind of a universally understood thing that time is extremely limited. And then back at the farm near the ICBM silo, the husband and wife go upstairs for cocky boing boing time, while an alert on the news regarding the 3 nuclear airburst detonations, and the kids have their gaze fixed on the TV. Cut back and forth between the chair force people, quickly making last-minute preparations in anticipation for all-out war. And his sister goes and does something elsewhere, just gone. We see the B-52 that was getting prepped for takeoff.
Working together to bring about the earliest possible ceasefire.
Roger, 159 is clear for takeoff on lane 5.
2-8 clear ground.
External post check 9. Stand by to start.
Get him up.
2-8 interrupt. 2 cars.
While somewhere else in the world, an alarm blares in a nuclear submarine. Danny, Jim's son, is filling up the milk jugs as he was told, which, on a real note, I was so put off when I saw him filling those up, because it wasn't the shitty plastic jugs I'm used to seeing. They're like, I don't know. It was off-putting is all. But anyways, Jim is preparing the basement with food while trying to convince his wife Eve to help out and understand that this is real. You get a funny, not funny clip of
There's not going to be a war, is there?
followed immediately by Anyways, red shirt guy gets dropped off basically outside of the Dahlberg's homestead, and on the B-52, things are looking more and more tense by the minute. There's a cut to the people doing maintenance on the ICBM silo, and alarm blares while they're told they need to get topside. Keys are put into ignition position, and the countdown begins. And well, I think this scene speaks for itself. sheer horror that would come from the side of the earth opening up and spewing out these spears with city-destroying bombs on the end of them. And the side of them means that either the other side is already launched if you're unlucky, or that you might have 7 to 10 minutes to hide if you're lucky. Jim is still trying to get his family to understand the gravity of the situation, with a general lack of understanding being had. In plain denial in the case of Eve, who is at a loss with the life she loved being wiped away by the actions of the people she and billions of others had no control over. After basically having to drag his wife into the basement, we cut to the hospital staff basically running out of the building to see one of the last grand spectacles humans may see for generations. Getting to see rocket propulsion be used one last time to drive our species to extinction rather than to space as we were meant to do. We see a quick interaction between our airmen friends who are understandably kind of losing it. With a lot of good points being thrown around, like,
either we fired first and they're gonna try to hit what's left, or they fired first and we just got our missiles out of the ground in time.
and the debate begins regarding what they can do to survive. While some have made up their minds to go underground, others are nervous.
No one leaves this facility.
Oh,
Not until the
man,
choppers.
who are you kidding? You kidding me, man? The bombs will be here before the choppers will. Listen.
Damn.
Listen to me, man. The war is over. It's over. We done our job. So what are you still guarding? Huh? Some cotton-picking hole in the ground, all dressed up and nowhere to go?
We cut back to Mr. Oakes once again on the freeway, going towards Kansas City instead of away. Absolute mad lad. Then we see Jim in his basement. Just cut right back. And his family... We see Jim in his basement, and he's loading a shotgun, hearing missiles fire off overhead as he does. We get a quick cut to McCoy having second thoughts about getting in a concrete suit with some military pals that don't have the best intentions. Just a gut feeling, though.
Your idea? No, not no hole in the ground was my idea. Yeah. Yeah, sure, man. Come on, make up your mind. Because you're either going to crawl down in that hole or you're going to shoot me in the back. So what does the book say, bozo?
He slams the trap door and runs to their service truck. The troops came in and leaves the gated area by... Wait. Oh, yeah. He slams the trap door, runs to the service truck. The troops came in and leaves the gated area by smashing through it. The next scene is one of a baseball field, with ICBMs rising above the horizon in the distance, followed by the slow roar of the Minuteman rocket engines.
They take about 30 minutes to reach their target. So do theirs.
There's some minor dialogue here, but the important scene is the two crew talking to one another, with one stating,
confirm, is this an exercise?
And another warning.
Roger, copy. This is not an exercise. Roger, understand.
Panic swallows the streets in their entirety as presumably hundreds of thousands, most likely millions, flee in a mostly vain attempt to find shelter that would not only survive the blast but the ensuing radiation and nuclear winter. Many attempt to escape the cities, causing massive congestion, with highways moving at a walking pace, introducing further the inevitability of death for millions of innocent people and destruction of everything they had once known. One thing that I thought was mildly funny about this scene is a police officer trying to goalie block people from getting past him but not even making contact with them. We see even thicker crowds of people stampeding through the streets in hopes of outrunning hundreds of ICBMs, presumably with multiple independent re-entry vehicles. And then...
Hey! Oh, come on, baby. Don't die on me now. Oh.
quickly as the attack began, it stopped, followed only by a deafening silence and a continued invisible attack against the survivors, leaving the millions that were vaporized in nothing more than an instant to look as if they were treated with mercy. And arguably they were. The scene that unfolds before us is one of desolation, destruction, and death on a scale not seen before, with a light snow consisting of dust, ash, and a radioactive material, with atmospheric particles that slowly drifts down and covers the landscape, leaving only a few remaining holdouts safe underground. The first living people we see is that of the Dahlberg family, distraught but alive. Now, just in the opening scene, one I thought was a good detail to have, and the other thing annoyed me tremendously. Now, first off, the fact Jim turned on the battery after the blast showcased some knowledge of EMP and its effects, and a very real way to counter it. And now for the thing that annoyed me, Jolene. If I had to choose between staying in a bunker with Jolene or taking my chances against the radiation in lack of most, if not all, of human needs, I'd choose the latter any day of the week. I could not stand her in this movie. I could not imagine standing her in real life. Speaking of outside the bunker, people at the University Basic Sciences building are trying their best to rig up some radios in an attempt to make contact with any other potential survivors. The radiation begins to kick up slowly, shown by the ominous noise of a Geiger counter clicking.
Here it comes.
In a similarly dangerous but far less calm hospital, all hell has seemingly broken loose, with hundreds of people filling the hospital in a desperate panic to save themselves from their injuries and the intense radiation pouring through everything and everyone. Dr. Oakes walks through the crowd, ordering one of the doctors to begin moving the uninjured into shelters on the campus, and while he attempts to do that, he gets thrown into a wall, and then it just cuts away to McCoy, who took cover in a flipped box truck, exiting with a blanket to offer light protection against the ever-increasing levels of fallout present on ground layer. McCoy just waddling through the forest next to the highway, and we get a cut back to the hospital where Dr. Oakes gives a pep talk to all of his radioactive patients, pleading with them to work with the hospital staff. He goes back up to discuss with doctors the situation regarding water, fuel, and the general lack of electricity. And after a good yap sesh, we get our next scene of a shirtless Jim digging a hole in a corner like a creature of the night. And he hears disturbances from upstairs. He shushes his family, grabs the gun, and begins to go upstairs. As he does, the door is opened by a guy named Steven. Was he probably shown earlier? I guess. I don't remember him, but there's a lot to remember in this movie. Anyways, somehow we go from him asking for where water is to him being let in. He goes downstairs, and I forgot that's where his actual introduction is. He goes to sit down and spills that he is from Kansas University. After a little more info about the damage that was done, we learn of a string of them to the south, telling us that basically the damage was far worse than the civilian population originally thought, with many thinking only one or two had gone off, and for some reason that only Kansas was hit. I mean, it was one person earlier, and that was really more implied than anything, but still. Anyways, we cut to the hospital where power has still not been restored to any usable extent, with flashlights in place of an operating lamp. You see a surgeon pulling shrapnel out of someone. Fuck. We see a surgeon pulling shrapnel or something out of someone's head, and we move to see tubes being sterilized with boiling water, and radiation burns out the wazoo. Huh? I don't know. I don't know what that meant. We see Dr. Oakes getting his head cleaned up a little, because if I remember correctly, he did have some sort of wound on top. Anyways, the nurse and doctor talk about what is to come, saying,
Everyone half alive or dying will find their way here.
Too late to become a dentist?
which I gotta say, that's a little funny. I mean, if there's time to make a light of a situation as awful as this, it's probably there, I guess. Anyway, I hope you liked the funny, because we're back to McCoy drifting through abandoned places, briefly stopping at a World War Veterans Memorial, seeing two people that are, from what I can tell, dead as hell. An unfortunate sight, but nothing can be done. The sight of death is all too common in the world that follows a nuclear apocalypse, or any large-scale bombing of that sort, causing a desensitization With the level of severity it can from the outside look as if the one going through it is a shell of a human. As McCoy moves on, he appears to still have the personality of someone who has emotionally and mentally remained intact, something that can't be said for many. As he finds a store, he enters and begins collecting candy bars off the floor. Hearing gunshots and dogs barking in the background, he knows he has to get moving. So he stuffs the food in his blanket and runs out of the store in the opposite direction of the noise. Back at the university building, Joe is attempting to make radio contact with other survivors still, offering an atmospheric update to anyone who's listening. And after calling out directly to Dr. Oakes, he made contact. And after learning a little about the ambient radiation levels, we get an optimistic answer to Oakes' question of when will it be safe to move people?
It'll never be safe.
After that conversation ends, we see Dr. Oakes in a complete state of exhaustion and emotional decay, reminiscing about his life before the war and feeling regretful towards the loss of his family, who were in Kansas at the time. The conversation ends at the sight of a cockroach, and I just want to play this clip because of all the scenes in this movie, this was probably the most random.
You are looking at man's legacy, the only guaranteed survivor of a nuclear war.
Anyways, back with the Dahlbergs, they're all generally unhappy with the canned food and power outages. I can't say I'd exactly be super stoked about that either. Some of them are taking it far, far worse than others, though, with the niece forgetting what her fiancé looks like and starting to lose it. She talks about how it's pointless and how she didn't want to use the birth control, which, is understandable, but also your parents weren't exactly plotting the end of the world. Although it is a really rough situation, so I digress. She starts saying she can't see anything and makes a break for it, and Steven runs after her. Luckily for her, though, she gets a nice sight of a dead, rotten dog, which probably leads any reasonable person to run away from it. But also, this is not a reasonable person. I mean, I guess she doesn't understand the dangers of the outside world at this time, but still. Your entire life is literally bombed to shit, and everyone else seems to understand, hey, maybe this whole radiation thing everyone is yapping about is something to worry about. But nope, not her. She runs out like it's a fucking snow day and snips on plenty of dead animals covered in fucking radioactive dust. And I have to say, this scene is haunting. Actually. If you kind of ignore what's happening with Denise, the sight of just dead animals and fields covered in dust that will rip you apart at the molecular level, and they just run into objects and corpses that are covered in this shit like there's nothing wrong. Even if the dust wasn't radioactive, you were surrounded by just decaying bodies for miles. And I know that there very apparently just wasn't a plan, but what was the plan here? Go die outside? Because you're not finding your fiance, I can tell you that much for free. He was dead long ago. And by the looks of it, you were at minimum a few miles away from any population center. Denise runs around these dead animals acting like a child, either not understanding the gravity of the situation or refusing to. And eventually runs inside after getting tackled twice by Steven, who then finds her on the stairs holding her wedding dress after she has what looks like a moment of clarity. Steven helps her up, and we cut to our next scene of radiation and dirt-covered nomads heading for their place of refuge. They have a sudden but temporary addition of McCoy, who ran over a hill and begins to talk about where they're going and where they came from. As it happens, McCoy learns there's little to nothing left of large portions of Kansas as a whole, with entire cities being wiped clean off the map. McCoy follows behind the group, seeing as he doesn't exactly have anywhere to go. Our next scene feels almost primitive. A dimly lit area outside the hospital filled with the light of torches and echoes of unrest as people begin to stampede into the building. Inside, the staff are not faring much better, critically low on supplies and beginning to run out of room for the dead. From Dr. Oak's orders, we can see that he does understand the situation at hand, and that more drastic measures must be taken in order to keep the peace while it can still last. And speaking of, we see a worker asking the doctor if he's heard about firing squads, which seems to put him off quite a bit. Although personally in a situation like this, I think a firing squad is reasonable for the list of offenses stated here, but then again, it's without a trial, so who's to say? The doctor seems almost mad at the guy for asking, and it's really not that out of the picture for the death penalty being used in a situation where there are no courts for you to be tried any longer. And I mean, in most cases where guns are used to keep a steady hold on power, firing squads usually aren't far off, you know? Anyways, McCoy finds a line for a water pump and some guy desperately trying to cut in line, seemingly having lost all sense of civility and critical thinking. He helps him out and essentially takes him under his wing. Almost literally, kind of. McCoy pulls out a candy bar and the NPC. McCoy pulls out a candy bar and the NPC viciously eats it. McCoy has an interesting line where he says,
"That's us, man, if we don't get to Lawrence. You hear me?"
Which feels vaguely threatening, but he says us, so it's okay. At the hospital, a C-section is being discussed when she's told she needs to be willing and brings up a fair point about the whole issue when starting over, with a very reassuring answer from the doctor that he doesn't know why he's still going. Anyways, elsewhere we see McCoy and our drifter friend floating across what I can only assume to be some sort of river, with what appears to be an encampment on either a small island or the other side of the river. The two lads just kind of wander for a bit before we cut back to the Dahlbergs, and Denise is trying to make out with Steven, who didn't exactly seem like he wanted it, and after they get watching, which is just wonderful. Daniel, or whatever the kid's name is mighty lucky to have bandages. He sure as shit can't see though, because he looked at the blast like an ape.
Danny!
Back at the hobo camp, McCoy is starting to experience the later stages of radiation poisoning, explaining that
I can't keep nothing in, not even my own hair.
And shows off bruises along his arm, presumably the early stages of necrotizing flesh. If you know anything about severe radiation poisoning, it's comparable to conscious decomposition. McCoy wants to know what he can do, but gets a blank stare for an answer, and at the hospital now, the radiation is lowered to what has been deemed safe exposure levels, leading the many slightly irradiated folks inside to stagger out like zombies. With the Dahlbergs now, they hear the church bell being rung by hand, causing them to exit. Only after moving the dead body of presumably a scavenger and making their way out into a more open area, Jim walks around, observing the damage done to his property and the corpses of his livestock. And as he does so, the reverend from earlier begins to voice over while we slowly fade into the congregation and the remains of the church. And like 30 seconds in, we see that Denise is bleeding through her skirt, which I don't know for sure if it's related to the radiation poisoning or if it was just that time of the month. But still, the look on her face is haunting. There's a lot of haunting things in this movie, and this is up there. Reminiscent of one of the end scenes that Come and See, which if you've seen that all the way through somehow, good God, man. Anyways, Denise is picked up and put onto a horse-drawn carriage, and the plan is to get her and Danny to a hospital, seeing as they could both use medical attention. And Denise is probably suffering from the nice film of radioactive dust she accumulated from running around and falling onto dead, irradiated, dust-covered animals. She's laid down and Stephen begins to ride off the two injured kids while Jolene and the parents stay behind. At the hospital, the crowd of people in need has been growing, but they are let in. And while in the adjacent science building, the radio is being used to listen actively, when a broadcast from the president is picked up. I'll let that and the reaction of the listeners play here.
President of the United States. My fellow Americans, while the extent of damage to our country is still uncertain and shall probably remain so for some time, preliminary reports indicate that principal weapons impact points included military and industrial targets in most sectors of the United States. There is, at the present time, a ceasefire with the Soviet Union, which has sustained damage equally catastrophic. Many of you, listening to me today, have suffered personal injury, sudden separation from loved ones, and the tragic loss of your families. I share your grief, for I too have suffered personal loss. During this hour of sorrow, I wish to assure you that America has survived this terrible tribulation. There has been no surrender, no retreat from the principles of liberty and democracy for which the free world looks to us for leadership. We remain undaunted,
before all but Almighty God, the government, functioning under certain extraordinary emergency options, we are prepared to make every effort to coordinate relief and recovery programs at the state and local levels. During the next 2 weeks, my staff and cabinet will attempt to relocate to National Emergency Reconstruction Headquarters at the present time, and until radiation pattern reports are made available over the emergency broadcast band or through your local authorities, I urge you to remain in areas offering maximum shelter protection from radioactive fallout, and to obey all local curfews. We are counting on you, on your strength, your patience, your will, and your courage to help rebuild this great nation of ours. God bless you all.
That's it? That's all he's gonna say?
Hey, maybe we're gonna be okay. What do you want to hear?
I want to know who started it, who fired first, who preempted.
You're never gonna know that.
What difference does it make?
He doesn't know how badly we were
He
hit,
sure would have
but he
told
knows
us if
were
they
hit
would have
just as
fired
bad.
first.
He doesn't want anyone to think we lost the war.
You believe that? You believe everything they tell you?
Doctor, you know what Einstein said about World War III? He said he didn't know how they were going to fight World War III, but he knew how they would fight World War IV. With sticks and stones.
In the hospital, Oakes is not looking good. With a lot of people trying to talk to him, he looks like he had one too many tabs and disassociates before landing against a wall and passing out. He wakes up in bed, disoriented in a state of PTSD seemingly, flashing back audibly and occasionally visibly. To many points Oakes was involved in throughout the movie. After an episode, he begins to become more aware of what's happening, and we see another patient kind of losing it. And next, we get a hard cut to mass graves being filled with bodies slowly at the island. We get a good overview of the refugee camp during the day, and it is rough to say the least. But I feel that's expected to an extent. Obviously, there isn't going to be a North Vegas Square situation remotely optimistic as in the Fallout games, especially considering it is, the day after. And while there were certainly nuclear shelters around the country, it was nowhere to the extent or level of survivability as Fallout, obviously. After our bird's eye view is over and we see who I assume is McCoy watching the beginning of a food riot, a relatively small scale one, but considering the number of people, it did escalate quickly. And at the hospital, we see Dr. Hachaya, found the name finally, chopping it up with our little flash-blinded homie. The midst all talk about the origin of Hachaya's name in a super comfortable conversation, and what looks like the remnants of a school provisional government of sorts talks about methods of decontamination and levels of importance in terms of food production. There seems to be a lack of understanding between the government and the farmers, Jim being the most vocal about the farmers' discontent with the plan brought up by them. Now I'm going to do a favor for you, the viewer, and not spoil this next scene that I thought was an important part of the plot. So if you find out what happens, you gotta watch. So if you want to find out what happens, you gotta watch the movie for yourself. You could still sit down with some friends and enjoy this movie for how dated it is. Or if you're like me, you'll enjoy the historical or more technically alternative historical narrative because you're a nerd. After a somber scene between Dr. Oakes and Hachaya, Dr. Oakes sets his sights on Kansas City, seeing as most of his family was obliterated there. Hitching a ride at a military 6x6 headed presumably towards Kansas, and what we can only assume is like 50 feet down the road, we're treated to the sight of corpses in uniform before two men tied to wooden poles come into frame, before being executed by a firing squad just off screen. We see one of the last scenes of the hospital, with Hachaya attempting to take off Danny's bandages before Danny requests he'd like to be home with his family. Now there are about 4 scenes left in the movie, each being at minimum somewhat movie, and I would once again like to save these last few scenes, save for one. The movie ends with a wall of text, a plea to world leaders to not destroy the lives of millions for the sake of an insignificant few. And for the last part of this summary, I would like to let it play out. Wow. So, a wild ride. The first time watching this is such a bizarre experience, but I think that same line of thinking can be applied to so many movies for the time. But this had such an in your face message that they literally put it on plain text to hammer it in more. I have some criticisms of the movie, but for right now, at this point in time, no criticism is allowed, only facts and good things. So let's start with the good. Let's start off with the setting. Cold War, Midwest United States, which I've heard a lot of firsthand experiences about living in that time, and the fears that this movie underscored were essentially right on the money. Fun fact, my parents are from the Midwest, from like the 80s, so that kind of hits close to home with my family, I'd say. The CGI made me laugh, but regardless of the constraints at the time, a lot of the filmography was done relatively well. Now, let's get some of the facts going because there are quite a few and we've already been here a while. From the wiki page, and I quote, "The film was shortened from the original 3 hours of running time to 2, which caused the scrapping of several planned special effects scenes, although storyboards were made in anticipation of a possible expanded version. They included a bird's eye view of Kansas City at the moment of 2 nuclear detonations as seen from a Boeing 737 airliner approaching the city's airports, simulated newsreel footage of U.S. troops in West Germany taking up positions in preparation of advancing Soviet armored units, and the tactical nuclear exchange in Germany between NATO and the Warsaw Pact after attacking Warsaw Pact forces breaks through and overwhelms the NATO lines, which to me sounds pretty kick-ass, and I'm kind of disappointed it didn't make the final cut." And quote, "ABC censors severely toned down scenes to reduce the body count or burn victims. Meyer refused to remove key scenes, but reportedly some 8.5 minutes of excised footage still exists, significantly more graphic. Some footage was reinstated for the film's relief on home video. Additionally, the nuclear attack scene was longer and was supposed to feature very graphic and very accurate shots of what happens to a human body during a nuclear blast. Examples included people being set on fire, their flesh carbonizing, being burned to the bone, eyes melting, faceless heads, skin hanging, deaths from flying glass and debris, limbs torn off, being crushed and blown from buildings by the shockwave, and people in fallout shelters suffocating during the firestorm. My God. That could have only been what I assume was 10 plus minutes of the dead and dying in extremely violent ways, which for something airing on international television in the 80s sounds kind of insane. And speaking of international television, next fact is pretty interesting. That being, in the United States, 38.5 million households or an estimated 100 million people watched the day after on a record audience for a made TV movie. Producer Sales Organization released the film theatrically around the world in the Eastern Bloc, China, North Korea, and Cuba. And this international version contains 6 minutes of footage not in the telecast edition. The Soviets, in fact, demanded that the dub for the movie be 1-to-1 and nothing be cut, which sounds unusual, but keep in mind the revisionist traitor Gorbachev was in power at the time, leading this to be one of the few okay things he would ever go on to do. One more final thing I liked about this movie is how it was a genuine ask for the world leaders to really understand how billions of men, women, and children don't deserve their lives to be extinguished by an indiscriminate hodgepodge of elected and unelected bureaucrats deciding that now is the time for the end of entire nations. Because it really speaks to me. Feeling some empathy for the people of past days, not too far gone from our own. With nuclear weapons and the Red Scare still being used as fear mongering methods, it is the hardest thing to imagine a nuclear war unfolding at the hands of geriatric corpses running the US and the ex KGB sociopath running the Russian Federation, or the US getting in a war with China over Taiwan, and Middle Eastern powers against Israel in the West. We still have so called flashpoints looming over our heads as threats to keep those that may threaten the status quo in line. And as much as I would love to talk on how self pronounced world police having Western military outposts in areas that all seem to have a claim staked by another power, whether it be Ukraine, Israel, or Taiwan, we always seem to have ways of defending these allegedly democratic nations for reasons that more often than not go far beyond the interests of the people, whether in the US or any specific country they've chosen to interfere in. Alright, side tangent over. Hey everybody, this is post original recording Irish, butting in to give a few more fun facts I found after doing some more research on the movie that I thought should go to waste. So we have the director Nicholas Meyer, Meyer got about 1,000 random Kansas citizens and used them as extras in filming, only using real stars like Jason Robards or Jo Beth Williams to give a more realistic feel, really allowing many of the people who don't necessarily know how to act a lot of room to act more natural than many performers arguably would. And a lot of them seemed to love it and enjoyed getting out to just help and inform themselves, which I think is a win-win for everyone involved. Honestly, kind of wholesome. So, old Saint Nick in his 80s short shorts gets a big gold star from me.
Recent accomplishment was the motion picture Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan.
Allegedly, this movie had a big effect on the Antichrist himself, Ronald Reagan, saying the movie was, and I quote, very effective and left me greatly depressed. After 1984, there was an alleged shift in Reagan's rhetoric as he began establishing closer ties with the Soviets and signing non-proliferation treaties with them as well. While it is fascinating, I think it could also be attributed to the geopolitical climate at the time, among other things, but I digress. Time for critiques. So, this movie is obviously pretty old, and just about every part of this movie screams that. From the acting to the CGI to even just the writing in some parts. That's not to say it's bad. I certainly wouldn't say it is. It simply has that 80s charm, which for better or worse can be pretty funny now. It feels like in the same vein as a semi-modern C-tier movie, something of a cult classic, if you will, although with a much darker and more somber plot than many other movies that could arguably be, compared to this one in terms of quality. Now, I'd like to take a moment and say two things. Firstly, I would like to make a plea, a call in the dark to those in power, and those who will hear. Please do not end the lives of millions for the sake of an insignificant few. Please do not send us back to the Stone Age. Please do not keep holding us hostage with nuclear weapons. And please use the atom to take us to the stars and indefinitely power our society rather than wipe us out. And secondly, thank you all so much for watching. If you've made it this far, please let me know what you thought. Comment Tom Harvey, leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video.